Well, good morning, colleagues. We are very pleased to be wrapping up our study on the Privacy Act today, and we have waited to the end to invite the ministers responsible for the legislation that we've been reviewing, and we're very fortunate to have with us today Minister Bryson, the President of the Treasury Board, and Minister Wilson-Raybould, our Justice Minister, and with them their staff, Ms. Dawson, Ms. Wright, and Ms. Khanna. We appreciate you being here. You're slated to be here for the first hour, so please help us in our deliberations and give us your insights. If we can have opening remarks from both of you for up to 10 minutes. And I have, in the order I have here on the agenda, we'll start, if it's okay, Minister Wilson-Raybould.
Sure. Well, thank you, and it's my first time before this committee, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning, and look forward to some discussion after we present our opening remarks. And thank you for welcoming my departmental officials. So, as you know, and as you've been studying, the Privacy Act is a quasi-constitutional law that affects almost all activities of government. It has not been substantially reformed since it came into force in 1983. You might approach Privacy Act reform by asking two questions. First, does the Act contain the right principles for Canada in the 21st century? And second, does it feature the right rules and mechanisms to put them into effect? My remarks will focus on how we can move Canada forward in answering these two questions. When we think about reforming the 1983 Privacy Act, our first instinct may be to focus on the impacts of changes in technology. Those changes can seem dizzying. Big data finds unprecedented ways of harnessing information. The Internet of Things promises to cover human environments in a web of coordinated sensors and processors. The growth of artificial intelligence brings new ways of solving complex problems. And with quantum computing on the more distant horizon, there is the possibility that in our lifetimes we will see an explosion of processing power which effects we can only dimly imagine. Speculation about technology is exciting. It can also be scary. It might provide the push for law reform, but it does not provide the direction. So instead, I want to talk to you or with you about two unchanging landmarks from which we can take our bearings for the review of the Privacy Act. They are trust and connection. When you look at strong communities, democratic institutions, and functioning markets, one thing is clear. When people connect through relationships and networks based on trust, they can achieve great things. And great things should be in store for Canada. We are poised to be an open, secure, inclusive, prosperous, creative, and democratic information society. And I'm proud to be a part of a government that is working on these goals. To achieve them, Canadians need to connect with each other, with civil organizations, and with other democratic institutions. And to connect, we need to be able to trust. When we connect with government online to seek information or a service, we need to be able to trust that the information we supply will be treated reasonably and respectfully according to the law. We need to know that we can trust the connected systems that allow us to travel, communicate, enjoy safe food, and receive government benefits. We need to be able to trust that connecting with government will never make us vulnerable to manipulation or unjustified intrusions on our privacy. And because ours is a democracy in which we collectively set rules for government, we need to understand what governments do with information about us. The Privacy Act sets a basic framework for the protection of privacy in Canadians' relationship with government. I agree with successive privacy commissioners, academics, organizations, parliamentarians, and Canadians who say that this basic framework in the Privacy Act is long overdue for a thorough review. That is why I've asked my officials in the Department of Justice to lead concentrated work alongside other departments towards modernizing the Act. The way I see it, privacy is not a drag on government institutions that are trying to achieve other important goals. Instead, privacy is a social good that makes all our collective projects better and more likely to succeed. Our government understands this. The mandate letter from the Prime Minister handed to me asks me to ensure that our government's policy goals can be achieved with the least possible interference with the rights and privacy of Canadians. I will work closely with my colleague, the President of the Treasury Board, who is responsible for the way the Act is implemented across government. I will also work closely with my other colleagues whose portfolios use personal information as they serve Canadians. And I hope to continue what this committee has started by connecting with Canadians of all groups and generations as we review the Privacy Act. So in your study, I encourage you to tackle some of the tough questions, always focusing on connections based on trust. For example, how should the Act, which was designed to be technologically neutral, take account of the changes in technology? How can the Act also serve us amid global and federal, provincial, territorial flows of information in the service of important Canadian projects? How could the principles in the Act guide government innovations to find new ways to serve Canadians better? I think that these questions are worthy of your committee's study. Eminent witnesses have appeared before you, such as the Privacy Commissioner, professional organizations, officials from other jurisdictions, government representatives, and accomplished academics. You are well equipped to influence the government's review of the Privacy Act and to affect the development of the law. I encourage you not only to make recommendations, but also state considerations, questions, and areas for further study. I very much look forward to the results of your deliberations and your excellent, I'm assuming, report that's going to come forward that's going to inform the work that I'm undertaking. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Bryson, could you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be back at your committee, and I'm pleased to have with me today Joyce Murray, the Treasury Board Parliamentary Secretary, as well as Jennifer Dawson, the Deputy Chief Information Officer at Treasury Board. The Privacy Act governs personal information handling practices of government institutions. It applies to all the personal information we collect, use, and disclose about individuals or federal employees. It gives Canadians the right to access their personal information held by a government institution, and it gives them the right to request that information be corrected if something is in fact inaccurate. Privacy Act, as my colleague, Minister Justice, said, came into effect in 1983. Depuis les années 80, grâce aux nouvelles technologies.
Since the 80s, advances in technology have provided many new ways of collecting and using personal information. Protecting this information is something we take very seriously, and it's our responsibility under the Privacy Act to do so.
Just as Minister pointed out, we know that the Act needs modernizing. Treasury Board, as the administrator of the Act, will be working closely with the Justice Minister, who will be leading this review. We will look forward to your committee's work to provide recommendations on how we can, among other things, modernize the law for the digital age. As President of Treasury Board, our Treasury Board oversees the administration of the Act across government. The Minister of Justice plays an important role. The Privacy Commissioner, of course, reports to Parliament through the Justice Minister. Our two departments worked together to support about 240 government institutions that are subject to the Act. I'd like to take a moment to break down some of the key statistics around the administration of the Privacy Act. Canadians submitted more than 67,000 requests for their own personal information in 2014-2015, increasing about 4% per year since 1983. 70% of the personal information requests were responded to within 30 days. Another 11% were completed within the permitted 30-day extension. In 2014-2015, government institutions reported 206 material privacy breaches to Treasury Board, or TBS. A material breach involves sensitive personal information and could reasonably be expected to cause injury or harm. The Secretariat receives and reviews reports of material privacy breaches by federal institutions, and we support institutions in the follow-up to these breaches. In April 2016, I stated that the government will work with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner to improve breach reporting, and TBS is currently engaging with the office to strengthen reporting of material privacy breaches. Also within the Secretariat, we set policies on how the Act is to be administered. We provide support to government institutions and as they carry out their responsibilities under the Act. And we monitor their performance. We collect data from all government institutions and we publish it in an annual statistical report on the administration of the Act. This strengthens or contributes to accountability and transparency and how Canadians' personal information is protected and managed. Monsieur le Président, dans ma lettre de mandat,
Mr. Chair, in my mandate letter, the Prime Minister directed me to ensure Canadians have easier access to their personal data. In Budget 2016, we committed to 2 measures to do just that. First, we're creating a simple, central website where Canadians can submit requests for information about themselves to any government institution.
Secondly, we will not only make it easier to request personal information, but we will improve the speed of the government's response. There will be a 30-day guarantee for fulfilling such requests. And if the response takes longer than 30 days, government institutions will have to provide the requester and the Privacy Commissioner with a written explanation for the delay. And we'll work with the Privacy Commissioner to develop new policy directions to implement this. Fact is, we need to find the best ways to balance the Canadians' need for better services with protecting their privacy. In closing, let me emphasize that balancing openness and transparency with protecting personal data is part of modernizing government in the digital age. We're continuously working to ensure that citizens' personal information held by government is well managed and that they have easy and timely access to it. We are looking forward to working with parliamentarians, looking forward to your report and to the Justice Minister's lead in terms of reforming the Privacy Act, and during that period we'll be working closely together in providing advice from the perspective of Treasury Board in terms of our role once that is completed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Bryson. We'll now proceed to our rounds of questioning. We'll start at our 7-minute round with Mr. Saini, please.
Good morning to both of you. A warm welcome to this committee and also to your officials. I want to start off with a bit of a broad question. One of the things that you both mentioned in your opening statements about how important it is to modernize the Act, but I also think that there's also an element of efficiency that we should have when creating new policies. So just a general question, maybe if I can get your comment, do you see any value in having government departments consult with the Privacy Commissioner regarding any policies that will affect the privacy of Canadians at the outset of that policy-making process as compared to maybe at the end when the Privacy Commissioner is brought in maybe to audit the policy? So to work in concert at the outset to make sure that, you know, there's no problems, everything's smoothed over, there's an efficiency process that's happening, as opposed to coming in at the end once a policy has been drafted, then having to audit that policy and then make changes afterwards.
Well, maybe I can speak to that initially. I see, in terms of looking at the Privacy Act, in terms of potential law reform, I see great value in engaging with a whole host of individuals, including the Privacy Commissioner. I've had the opportunity to meet with him already on a number of occasions, and see value in continuing to do that throughout the course of our studies and investigations into what potentially could be most appropriate in terms of reform. Likewise, I see tremendous value in receiving the report from this committee, and we'll consider that in depth. I've, as I said, already instructed my officials to start to do substantive studies around potential areas of law reform, and then further at the end and included within this process for a substantive review of the Privacy Act as it is right now, and an eye to modernization to ensure that we engage with Canadians, and it's my intention to do so in a substantive way.
I think, Raj, the Commissioner, you know, the idea of doing privacy impact assessments on any new initiative, I think makes a lot of sense, and I know the Commissioner is interested in that approach. We would recommend to any government department or agency that they take them up on that. It's in the same way that a government department or agency, in considering something, can check in with other commissioners, including access to information, or the Information Commissioner as an example. But I think that it's far better from a governmental perspective and from a citizen's perspective that we take into account their advice preemptively as part of implementation or development of a new policy, than in the form of a report that is usually, you know, pointing out what went wrong. It would make more sense to, because this is what they do every day. They are experts in these areas. So the Privacy Commissioner has a lot of expertise in their shop, and is, you know, he is within his shop. So it commends itself to me, the recommendation he's made, that we would engage him as part of the process of developing policy.
The second question I have is regarding the public education mandate. I think the Privacy Commissioner has also spoken about the fact that maybe he should have a greater ability to provide information to Canadians, explain to them exactly what their privacy rights are. Do you think that should be encouraged in the powers that he has, in the powers of the office, to make sure that Canadians understand what their privacy rights are and what the limitations or advantages are?
One of the things, and Jody will want to add to this, but one of the things we have in the digital age, the ability as a government to disseminate information broadly to Canadians much more easily than at any time in our history. So the ability for us to put that information out there so that Canadians can understand their privacy rights and the policies that protect them is there, and it makes sense that we communicate that transparently. So that makes a great deal of sense to me.
I just underscore what my colleague has said. I think the role that the Privacy Commissioner can play in and around education is incredibly important. I believe that was one of the recommendations to bolster that education role, so individuals can have a substantive understanding with respect to their rights and as they relate to our institutions of government. I think it's an important role that should be considered in a concrete way.
One final question I wanted to ask is that, as you know, part of the debate during the study we did on access to information and currently ongoing is to decide what powers we should give to the commissioners, whether it be the Information Commissioner or to the Privacy Commissioner. And the question I have is, do you think that each office should have the same powers, or should there be a separation where one may get full order-making powers and another might use the hybrid model? Do you think it's advantageous to give them both, or should there be a difference in the powers that each office has?
Well, I mean, my colleague can speak to considerations with respect to the Information Commissioner, but I do again recognize some of the recommendations that the Privacy Commissioner has put forward, and certainly the importance of the role that he plays in and around education and the international work that he undertakes in terms of reviewing what's happening in other jurisdictions. Having said that, again, recognize that he's made some recommendations in terms of additional powers. I certainly am open to your deliberations and considerations therein. Movement towards additional enforcement powers for the Commissioner would be a fairly dramatic change in terms of the legislation, but not one that certainly wouldn't be something to consider as you deliberate and study, and certainly my officials are looking at that as well.
My understanding, and of course, Justice Minister will be leading the reform of Privacy Act, but in March, I think the Privacy Commissioner recommended improving the ombudsman model. He mentioned the Newfoundland and Labrador model, I think at that time, and I think in September he spoke of an order-making power. So this is something that you as a committee in your deliberations and in your report, I hope you'll take a look at the models.
He made that comment based on the fact that the Information Commissioner wanted full order-making powers.
Okay.
So that was a response to some of the commentary she made.
All right, forward to your report.
Thank you very much. Moving on, our next questioner is Mr. Genereux, please, for 7 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, and thank you to you and your staff for preparing for today. I really appreciate you coming before us. So it's just I can't help myself, but Minister Bryson, with some of that logic, you would think then you would contact the Ethics Commissioner before you would have a type of fundraiser or not, perhaps. But I promised I wasn't going to get too partisan today, so I'll just leave that linger out there, if we will. Do want to talk about some of the comments you made here earlier. 67,000 people have requested their information privacy, increasing 4.5% per year. One of the recommendations and some of the witnesses that we've seen have suggested opening this up to outside of Canada. Hoping we can get some of your thoughts on that, particularly based on the 70% of commitment within 30, or 70% of the people that are seeing the 30-day commitment right now.
I think my and Justice Minister will have something to say on this, but in terms of the primary function would be to serve our citizens and improving the efficacy of our service to our citizens wherever they live in the world. I think ought to be the primary function, and I think we can make significant improvements before we open up to anyone anywhere in the world. That's my instinct on this, Matt, and so that's where I would focus initially, is strengthening our response times, both the quality and the timeliness of our response to Canadian citizens would be the focus. That's my instinct. Jody?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and agree with my colleague. And in terms of universal access, this is something that has been discussed and recommendations made, and certainly there's the general principle, and acknowledge the general principle that individuals should be able to understand and know what information government institutions have on them, subject to some some strict exceptions, but from my understanding, in terms of the discussion that has been had around this, that there is a resource consideration that needs to be taken into account, and we would be very open and welcoming of the feedback that you would have in this regard.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. The question that struggle with and that I've struggled with here is how much do we put into the Act in terms of the technology advancements that we're seeing. It's constantly the we don't know what we don't know argument. So do we? I'm curious on both your thoughts on this. Do we limit it? Are we take a specific path and say this type of technology is what we're going to cover, or do we leave it broad and leave it open to interpretation and perhaps put some of that into the policy around it?
Good question.
It definitely is a good question, and in my opening remarks where I was speaking about technology and how quickly technology advances, certainly something that could be delved into more deeply and have discussion. Would welcome that discussion from this committee. As introduced back in 1983, the Privacy Act was intended to be technologically neutral so as to account for the changes, the rapid changes that occur over time. But again, and the Privacy Act setting that broad framework for the relationship between government institutions and individuals in terms of their information. So would again be very open and welcoming of any suggestions or guidance in that regard.
Just one thing, if I may, Matt, as you know, we're currently reviewing and the Access to Information Act, and we'll be coming forward in the future with new legislation on that. Both of them being introduced, the Privacy Act, the Access to Information Act in 1983. Technology has affected both of them in different ways. One of the things we're looking at in terms of the Access to Information Act is every 5 years, having a full review after we introduced the legislation in 2017, but having a full review in 2018 and every 5 years after that, such that we never are in the place where it is dated. You know, that applies on Access to Information Act, where Treasury Board is taking the lead role in terms of the reform of it. It applies very much to access to information. I don't know to what extent, but I think it's good governance. Periodic reviews of acts, particularly given the rapidity of change in terms of technology and information technology, is something that makes a lot of sense.
So just to be clear then, if you would support a 5-year review of the Access Information Act, but the Privacy Act not so much, or?
Look forward to your report. I mean, I'm saying that this is something we have proposed in terms of access to information. This is something, again, my colleague, Minister Wilson-Raybould, is leading on the whole area of the Privacy Act.
Yeah, I appreciate how many times you said you're looking forward to our report. I hope we don't disappoint, Minister.
I hope so too.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's
quickly,
almost Christmas.
I have. Yeah. Well, okay. We'll target Christmas. Quickly, I have about 30 seconds left. In terms of the timeline for reforming the Privacy Act, Minister, if you're able to comment on the work that you've been doing in parallel with our committee, how that would, how we can feed into some of that.
Sure, and I wish I could give you a timeline, but recognize that the Act hasn't been updated for 30 years. Certainly, I think that we can all appreciate the necessity of taking the time to ensure that we're doing a substantive review, certainly of the report. As I said, my officials are undertaking that substantive review. There is a working group that has been put in place So I hope to and will, recognizing the mandate letter that I have from the Prime Minister, ensure that we've appropriately engaged with all stakeholders, Canadians, and take account of the reports and recommendations from the Privacy Commissioner, and move forward in a thoughtful and concentrated way to reform the Act.
Just
you,
one
Mr.
quick, I hope you'll consider our work that we're doing here. We're doing, we've done, I think your side of the table would agree, we've done a substantial amount of outreach to stakeholders, and hopefully we're not paralleling a lot of that, but appreciate your time. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. We now move to Mr. Blakey for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Ministers, for being here with your staff, and Parliamentary Secretary Murray for coming and spending some time with us today. My first question is for the Minister of Justice. Recently, the courts ruled that CSIS had been gathering and retaining the personal information of Canadians for 10 years and failing in its duty of candor to the courts with respect to that collection of personal information and its retention. An Assistant Deputy Minister of yours went so far as to provide an opinion that CSIS was in keeping with the rules, and that opinion, the court stated, was not factual. I'm wondering what it is that you're doing today to ensure that that kind of incident is not going to be taking place again. I'm wondering what kind of laws or what kind of changes you believe should be made to the privacy or other acts in order to ensure that that doesn't happen again.
Well, thank you for the question, and certainly recognize the judgment that came out with respect to CSIS and information. My department and the Minister of Public Safety take the judgment incredibly seriously, and obviously have read it very closely, and will uphold the decision. I, in many different areas, work closely with the Minister of Public Safety, and I know that he has publicly spoken about this matter, and I have the utmost confidence in him to ensure that he's working with CSIS to address what the judgment has said, and has gone so far as to speak to looking at the directives that he has provided. And again, I will support him in that in any way. And our government is committed to ensuring that we are open and transparent, and that we comply with that judgment. And
I think many Canadians outside of government also recognize that decision, but are concerned to know what in particular is actually going to be done to ensure that this doesn't happen again. So it's great to have a kind of general commitment to not having it happen again. But if it was a failure of law, then presumably there are legislative changes that ought to be made in order to ensure it doesn't happen again. Is it your opinion that the law wasn't right and either should enable this collection, or is it your contention that the law was good here and then there was a failure at the staff level, either within CSIS or within your department, to interpret that law properly? And if so, what's the proper follow-up for that? I mean, what are you actually saying to staff in terms of ensuring that this doesn't happen again? I think people want to know what are the concrete measures being taken in order to ensure that this doesn't happen again. I think we agree at the high level that we need to recognize decisions that courts make here in Canada, but that doesn't tell us very much. So what concretely are you doing within your department, and should we be considering changes to the Privacy Act here in order to help ensure that it doesn't happen again?
Well, I guess I would again acknowledge your questions and your probing for details, and certainly I would expect that you appreciate that, like other Canadians, that we have taken the judgment incredibly seriously and are following up. In terms of concrete steps, as I said, I will continue to work with the Minister of Public Safety. He certainly has engaged with CSIS on this and is reviewing their activity and his direction. And that's in the broader context as well, leaving aside the potential law reform with respect to the Privacy Act. We are together engaged in a substantive and comprehensive review of our national security framework. And discussions contained within the green paper that we put out have 10 items for discussion. I would encourage people to participate and be involved in that consultation. And,
I'm going to jump in because we've only got 7 minutes.
Could be brought up.
But on a specific legislative issue, one of the things that we've heard here is that there's some ambiguity, a kind of systematic ambiguity about whether the Privacy Act trumps other acts. So there's a provision in the Privacy Act that says it applies subject to any other provisions of any other acts of Parliament or regulations thereof. And we're looking at that, especially in the context of our other study of the Security of Canada Information Sharing Act. In your opinion, where there's a conflict between those two acts, do you believe that the Privacy Act should take primacy over SCISA, or do you see the interpretive burden cutting the other way?
Well, I mean, in terms of what we're speaking about, in terms of the Privacy Act and it being a general framework to oversee government institutions of the order of 240, I think that this is definitely a conversation that we're going to have, or we're having today, and that we're going to continue to have. Recognizing that covers our security agencies as well, that broad framework in terms of the Privacy Act. But in the context of having discussions around the national security framework, I believe and would encourage individuals to and parliamentarians to engage in that consultation and provide input with respect to specifically the national security review.
And that's part of the issue, is whether subsection 5.1 of the Privacy Act provides a loophole so that, given SCISA, the kind of broad Privacy Act framework doesn't apply to our security agencies in the way that it should, because they can bypass it if they're authorized under SCISA. So that's part of what's at issue here, and I'm just curious to know if you have a more specific opinion as to whether or not, if it's the view of government that the Privacy Act first and foremost ought to apply in these situations, or whether it's acceptable that other laws can bypass that broad privacy framework and allow agencies to disregard it.
Well, my colleague has assisted in providing me with some of the words from the Minister of Public Safety in follow-up to the Commissioner's comments and recommendations. And he reminded ministers from 17 institutions that collect information under SCISA of their obligations relating to privacy impact assessments.
All right.
Your time, Mr. Blakey. We now move to the last of the 7-minute rounds before we move to the 5 minutes. Mr. Erskine-Smith, please.
Perfect. Thanks very much, and thank you, ministers, for being here. I wanted to pick up where Mr. Blakey left off to some extent with respect to SCISA and just the bulk data collection and retention. And why I mentioned SCISA in the context of the Privacy Act is because in both the context of SCISA and in the context of the Privacy Act, we talk about standards of collection, retention, and disclosure, and specifically the necessity standard. We had the Privacy Commissioner before us. He said the most important change you would make is a necessity standard for collection across all government departments. And I wonder if, ministers, you could speak to the importance of that standard and whether we can see that standard becoming law within our mandate.
Well, maybe I could speak to that just briefly and then hand it over to the President. I know that this has been, as you say, a recommendation coming from the Commissioner, and there are jurisdictions in the country that do have that necessity requirement. In Alberta, in Quebec, and in Ontario. It's something that we're open to consideration and reflection on, but specifically
The government policy is that government institutions ought to only collect that information that is actually necessary or required, and we want to ensure that, and the Privacy Commissioner has provided advice, as will your committee, that we only collect and we only retain personal information that is required, but is also in accordance to the Privacy Act and all policies. Again, the report from the committee will help guide us on that. But the general policies, only requesting information that is necessary. is an important guiding principle in terms of.
Yeah, though we had committee testimony with respect to that standard in the context of SCISA, we had government agencies saying disclosure on the basis of relevancy is important, but of course their collection of the recipient agencies, so it depends upon their mandate. And so CSIS has a strictly necessary mandate, but other agencies don't in fact have that necessity standard as recipient agencies. And there's probably a problem there if we don't heed the Privacy Commissioner's words in importing a necessity standard across the board. Speaking of mandates, so again, this gets to Justice Noel's decision, but we have Professors Forces and Roach come before us and say it's very important that we make crystal clear that receiving recipients must operate within their existing mandates and legal authorities, and that agencies put in place protocols for ensuring the reliability of shared information as per the Arar Commission recommendations. And I wonder if, Ministers, you would have something to say in response to the professors.
Well, thank you for the question, and certainly cannot speak with authority with respect to what was presented, but understand that this is being dealt with in the context of the broader national security framework and is contained within the green paper that has been distributed. So I would put it over into that discussion. And
yeah, I was thinking, that's a fair point. I was thinking more of putting in the context of the Privacy Act specifically, that rather than having that in SCISA per se, and it gets to the final authority, as it were, between SCISA and the Privacy Act, but perhaps the Privacy Act would make crystal clear that when information is shared, the recipient agencies must not only it be necessary for their mandate, but they have to operate strictly within their mandate, given we have seen some worrisome behavior from some agencies at the very least. I want to get to the resources for review. So we have a lot of information sharing as between government agencies. We have the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, who specifically with respect to SCISA sharing has had some difficulties in obtaining all information from departments. And when we talk about whether the Privacy Commissioner has sufficient resources to do adequate review of information sharing, should they have the power to compel the deletion of unreliable information? And if not the Privacy Commission, should we be looking at, in the context of the SCISA, we've heard a super CERC type body that would be able to look at all information shared between government agencies. How do we tell Canadians and show Canadians that we have a review body that is seized with this and ensure that privacy is in fact being adequately protected?
I want to speak to the Parliamentary Committee.
Well, I mean, again, this is the same answer that I provided last time. I mean, these are discussions that will be had and we have heard in and around the roundtables that we've been conducting, and my supporting Minister Goodale in terms of these reviews. But in terms of the information sharing now as they are with respect to differing institutions, I mean, I would look to my colleague to speak to that.
But also, I mean, broadly, on behalf of the government, one of the commitments that we made and Minister Goodale is helping lead is the Parliamentary Committee that will oversee all security activities. I think that Parliamentary Committee and will bring us in line with other members of the Five Eyes, our partners in security globally, but also will have the power to oversee and to provide advice on some of these matters. But it's important. I mean, we mentioned technology earlier, and governments have technology, and people who there's international criminal organizations have technology. So we need to, the sharing of information needs to be done in a way that is consistently respectful of privacy.
And to that
but
point,
also, also recognizes the operational issues in facing high security threats from time to time. So that is a balance between personal security or rather between security and liberty, and that is one that we take seriously as a government.
I was more driving at the resource question of the Privacy Commissioner. That is one body we have to review the adequacy and of protection of of privacy with respect to the sharing of information, and whether the Privacy Commissioner currently has adequate resources to do that job without a super cert type body, without the parliamentary committee currently up and running. Is there a gap in review that the Privacy Commissioner could fill with more resources?
I'm just conferring with officials, but the Privacy Commissioner is undertaking that review already. I mean, I guess I just would, at the end, in responding to all of your comments, recognize that substantive oversight is important.
Yeah.
How that, in the circumstances of which the different circumstances of which you're speaking about, how that is going to manifest or be addressed, or the recommendations that are going to be provided from this committee and others that we're engaging in with respect to the Privacy Act are ongoing, and we will consider all options about how the role of oversight, appropriate oversight, can be bolstered.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Erskine-Smith. We're going to move to the 5-minute round. Before we do, though, I just want some clarification. I'm going to exercise a bit of chair's prerogative here. Mr. Wilson-Raybould, you talked about the green paper and the dialogue that's going on to create or to discuss the issues that were brought up by Mr. Erskine-Smith. Could you just kind of elaborate for this committee, as we're about to prepare a report for you, what the discussions and how those discussions weave into what our committee might be doing, because I think we need to focus on what would augment the discussion that's currently going on. Is there any further clarification that you can provide this committee so that we can make sure that we're giving you what you need in the context of having another conversation that sounds like it's doing some of the work that this committee is actually doing?
Well, I mean, I appreciate the question and seeking clarification, and recognize a number of the questions have been relevant to the national security consultations that are taking place and the green paper that has been issued in that regard. And that consultation is continuing. I mean, obviously that's incredibly important, and I'm supporting Minister Bryson in that regard. But with respect to the specific review of the Privacy Act and the broad framework in terms of our government institutions and their relationship with individuals and information, I would very much welcome focus on that, leaving aside the consultations that we're undertaking with respect to the national security framework.
Very well. Thank you very much. We now move to Mr. Kelly for the 5-minute round. Start us off, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So several of the Privacy Commissioner's recommendations include requiring government departments sharing information under the Act to complete a privacy impact assessment and conclude written agreements with how they're to use the information. So we're going to be talking about supplemental estimates in the later part of our meeting with respect to the Information Commissioner. But as Mr. Bryson, as the guardian of the Treasury within, or the guardian of the purse within government, can you address or comment on the costs of this, of what the requirement of privacy impact assessments would be? Has any thought been given to that?
Well, I don't have a specific cost of what a privacy impact assessment would be, but it strikes me as being good governance, that as we're introducing legislation or changes in policy, that this would be an outreach that could potentially save government money in avoiding errors in the future. So the question, so I don't see that conducting a signal check, an assessment with the engagement of the Privacy Commissioner would add significantly. I would want to have a discussion with him, with his office, in terms of what an increase in the level of activity could mean for them. It strikes me that the level of activity may not increase, but it would front-end load his work, his office's work. So it may not increase the actual burden in terms of their shop, but it would increase the efficacy of their intervention because it would be earlier on.
There's a hope and expectation that it will lead to lower costs, but no real consideration yet.
Well, what we also want to do is there's lower cost. There's also better efficacy in terms of and better governance. So we would consider both.
Okay. So the Commissioner's third recommendation is to make reporting of privacy breaches mandatory. Can either comment on both the costs and benefits of implementing mandatory reporting, and what steps would be necessary to ensure that the act of reporting not compound damages to individuals that have suffered a breach of privacy?
Well, I mean, I can speak to that, and certainly am open to that recommendation from the Commissioner in terms of considerations around law reform, but I would look to the President to speak about how that works right now in terms of policies between different institutions and reporting.
Government institutions are currently required to report material privacy breaches in writing to TBS and to the Privacy Commissioner. We were open to suggestions in terms of whether to expand beyond that, but we're also material breaches are ones that have potentially a harmful impact on people, and moving beyond that would be a significant increase. For instance, and I was asking this question when I was being briefed on this, what would be an immaterial privacy breach? As an example, if a citizen requests a Canada Food Guide and it's mailed to the wrong address inadvertently, that is in some way a breach of their privacy, but was there any material impact on the individual? The incidents of those kind dramatically outnumber the incidents of the material ones. So, it's always in government, we want to be focusing on activities that actually benefit people and getting better at those. So focusing on strengthening our response to material breaches and reportage of material breaches strikes me as an area where we still can do better.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. We now move to Mr. Bratina.
That leads me to my question, and it has to do with the seriousness of the Privacy Act, because legislation that has serious consequences, you could say treason, you're liable to get hung for that in some places, whereas singing the wrong words to the anthem, probably the punishment won't be as bad. As a municipal councillor and mayor, the most serious thing that I was confronted with was drinking water. And so let me just read to you the consequences as a municipal councillor. The Safe Drinking Water Act includes a statutory standard of care for individuals who have decision-making authority over municipal drinking water systems or who oversee the operating authority of the system. This can extend to municipal councillors. There are legal consequences for not acting as required by the standard of care, including possible fines or imprisonment. So what I'm looking for is strong wording in the Privacy Act that relates to breaches and consequences. So I'm hoping that the government will be open to a review of how seriously we take these breaches and what consequences ultimately might be applied. So I'd be interested in your comments on that.
Well, I appreciate the question and the comments, and certainly I think that in broadly looking at the review of the Privacy Act and reflecting on some of the comments I made in my opening remarks, the integrity of the Privacy Act and the review that we're undertaking is dependent and wants to bolster the trust that personal information will be held, data will be held in a secure manner, and that where there's breaches of the Act, that there are consideration of the appropriate remedies in that regard. So certainly I'm open to, again, and it's not to sound like a broken record, because we really are at the investigative stage and understanding what's available in terms of the overview and renewal, modernization of the Privacy Act, what would be most appropriate, and very happy to receive feedback in that regard. And I think underlying that, as I said, is to ensure that individuals have trust in that the governing institutions are appropriately managing and securing the data that they acquire and have, and vis-a-vis the individuals.
Well, that's my point. That, and you said it well at the beginning about the trust is the underpinning of all of this. I mean, technology is going to change. There could be technological lapses, and but inadvertent sharing of information because someone wasn't clear that we shouldn't really be telling this other country about this person. It's, I think, the requirement of their understanding of their mandate to know that there are serious consequences. You'd better be very careful that when you move this information around, that if you did the wrong thing, there will be a consequence. And I'm not even suggesting what the consequence should be, but I'm just wondering whether we have the strength in language currently, or whether that's something we should approach in our deliberations as to how to move the Privacy Act to the next generation.
Just the policy, but in terms of the enforcement of the policy, having the teeth, that there's real accountability for those who have personal information of Canadians and what they do with it. And I'm open to that. The other thing that I would hope as a committee, that when you're doing your report, you're looking at other countries and best practices, because we can sometimes benefit from that as well, and protocols around how to deal with not just reportage of breaches, but also how do you hold people accountable for those.
That's my question. Thank you.
Have very limited time left. Mr. Lightbound, do you have a quick question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just like to, we've talked about how the Act was supposed to be technology neutral. We've heard stories of, for instance, CSEC collecting metadata of Canadians in Canadian airports back in 2010. Those stories were revealed by the CBC. Now, we assume that the explanation that CSEC would have for that is that metadata is not per se personal information, they can therefore collect it. Do you think it would be appropriate in the Privacy Act to include metadata so that it be considered personal information and clearly defined as such?
Well, I mean, again, I would recognize that we're looking to substantive review of the Privacy Act as a broad framework as it relates to all of the governing institutions. I think that discussions, I know that discussions around metadata is occurring within the national security consultations. But looking at the Privacy Act and managing the potential reform that we're going to undertake, it's to keep it applicable to all of the governing institutions, and becoming specific with respect to individual, whether it's security agencies or otherwise, would be challenging in terms of looking at that broad framework.
Just to clarify, Jennifer's informed me that the Privacy Act does not explicitly address metadata, because it was done in 1983, but that metadata does meet the definition of personal information in the Act. So it would apply in terms of that.
Thank you.
I guess this is the challenge of ever evolving and
Yep,
changing
yep.
technology and identification.
Yeah, and it's not an easy thing to keep up with the technological changes, and to write technologically neutral language is going to be one of the challenges that your department's going to face, Madam Minister, and the committee, I'm sure, is going to provide you with some excellent recommendations. Colleagues, there's not enough time to start another 5-minute question, so I would like to thank the committee members for their excellent questions. Thank you very much to both of our ministers for appearing today, and for the staff. This concludes the witness list that we have for the review of the Privacy Act. And this is to let colleagues know, Mr. Blakey, I'll get to you in a second. This is to let colleagues know that we will be reviewing the Privacy Act next week. We will be considering the draft report. We will be getting the draft report tomorrow. It will not have had time to go through verification of the interpretation of both French and English versions. Normally the analysts would do that, but in an effort to get the report in the hands of the committee members before next Tuesday as soon as possible, you will have both a French and English version that has not yet been verified that the language is the same, so please don't get hung up on that. We'll deal with that next week. The analysts will come Tuesday to talk about any differences in the language in the report, focus more on the content of what is there, and we'll begin those deliberations. So thank you very much. Mr. Blakey, before we suspend, did you...
Thank you. Yeah, just before we get started with the next witness, I wanted to move the motion of which I gave notice on Tuesday, that the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, pursuant to Standing Orders 1082 and 1083H7, undertake a study of the Conflict of Interest Act and other initiatives which relate to the ethical standards of public office holders. That the witnesses invited to appear before the committee in relation to this study include John Dugal, Coordinator of Development and Events for the Liberal Party of Canada, to testify about his role in the organization of private fundraising events involving cabinet ministers, and that the committee report its findings to the House of Commons.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blakey. We do have the Information Commissioner waiting, so I hope, colleagues, that we can deal with this expeditiously. As you moved the notice of your motion last Tuesday, I asked the clerk to provide me for some guidance on this. My initial review of it in consultation with the clerk is that the motion is very much on the very edge of being admissible on the grounds that Standing Order 1082 does not actually apply to the Ethics Committee mandate. So in order for this to continue before the committee, I would need an amendment to the motion that would make the motion more admissible. And Mr. Kelly, is that what you're...
Yes, I have an amendment to the motion. I moved an amendment that the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, pursuant to Standing Order 1083H6, undertake a study on certain provisions of the Conflict of Interest Act in regards to public office holders' participation in fundraising activities, and that the Coordinator of Development and Events for the Liberal Party of Canada be requested to testify before the committee in this matter.
So just to be clear, Mr. Kelly, let's take a look at this.
Do you have another copy of the wording there, Pat? Yeah. So essentially it's, you know.
So, Mr. Kelly, your amendment is a fairly substantive change to the motion that's currently presented by Mr. Blakey. The section referring to 1083H7 would appear to make the motion more closely to being admissible because that fits within the mandate of the Ethics Committee. However, your amendment also changes other significant language here, and I'm going to look just quickly to Mr. Blakey if he accepts in the premise of this that it doesn't substantially change the intent of the motion as he intended it before the committee.
Yeah, I'm satisfied that the changes in wording don't change the substance of the motion.
Okay, Mr. Lightbound.
Yes, so I move that the debate be now adjourned and that we vote on the motion.
So hang on.
Non-debatable.
All in favor? Mr. Blakey.
Are motions to summarily cut off debate on a motion before the mover has even had a chance to motivate the motion in order?
Are you asking?
I'm asking as a mover of a motion, do I have the right to motivate my motion before we proceed to a vote?
To speak to the motion?
Yeah.
Is that what well, I assumed that you were going to speak to it. I moved to Mr. Kelly for an amendment, and that was the speaking order that I had. So I apologize if I didn't give you an opportunity to speak to your motion. But
my impression was that I would get an opportunity to motivate, but that you were intervening quickly on an issue of whether the motion was in order. Presumably, if the ruling was that it was not in order, then I wouldn't have the opportunity to speak to a motion that was not in order. And so it was important to decide, first of all, whether the motion was in order before I motivated for a motion that was out of order.
The motion was likely not going to be in order until I acknowledged Mr. Kelly, who moved an amendment to your motion, which moved the motion more closely back in order. As a matter of courtesy, I checked with you to make sure that the changes that Mr. Kelly was making would not substantially change the intention of your motion. Then we're now discussing the amendment to the motion. So now we're no longer actually talking about your motion. Had I ruled, there would have been no opportunity for you to even address the motion because I would have had to rule it out of order. Then, on the speaker's list, I had Mr. Lightbound on the list, who is now asking for the debate to be adjourned. This is a dilatory motion. There is no debate on this, and as the chair, if I have failed in some way, Mr. Blakey, I apologize, but as we have a dilatory motion, and I've acknowledged Mr. Lightbound, I have to accept, and it's a non-debatable motion, and it has to be dealt with accordingly. So I have to take the recording of this at this particular point.
Well, then I would ask that we have a recorded vote at least.
Okay, we can do that, certainly. I'll ask the clerk to call out the roll.
So that the debate now adjourns. Mr. Bertina, yes or no? Yes. Mr. Erskine-Smith? Mr. Lightbound? Mr. Long? Mr. Massey? Mr. Sini? Mr. General? No. Mr. Kelly? No. Mr. Blakey? No.
The motion is carried.
Is there then an opportunity to speak to the motion before we have a ruling on its admissibility? I think what's important here is that we do have opportunities in good faith to change the wording of the motion, and it's important, I would think, for all members of this committee that we have the opportunity to hear about how some of these events have been organized, so that the government has an opportunity to explain what how they've been organizing these activities and whether or not they're appropriate. So, I mean, I think I don't see a reason why any members of the committee wouldn't want to have a discussion about this. It's an important issue in the Canadian public eye at the present time. I think that those who are involved in organizing these events have a lot to tell Canadians about whether they're appropriate or not. And if it's a matter of simply making other changes to this motion in order to hear that conversation and give the government the opportunity to explain whether or not they're doing anything untoward to Canadians, that we should avail ourselves of that opportunity. We've had up to 80 of these events have been organized. So there's a number of them. It's been an issue in the House. It's been an issue in the media. We've been getting the same answer from the government. So I think it would be good to hear from someone from the Liberal Party that might be able to add new information.
Mr. Blakey, the debate on this has been adjourned. Your motion and the amendment to it has not been defeated. We have not actually had the question on this. We will have opportunities to discuss this. But because the motion that was moved by Mr. Lightbound and accepted and adopted by the majority of the members on this committee has adjourned the debate on this particular issue, I am now obligated as the chair to move on with the agenda that we have today.
Did it not close debate on the amendment and not the motion? Or I'm just seeking clarity.
That's an interesting question.
Put up your hand to speak.
Advice of the clerk, if the debate is adjourned on the amendment, it's considered part of the original motion, so it's adjourned for this particular. Colleagues, we have the information commissioner here. Let's if we're going to Mr. So very quickly,
I just want to echo my colleagues' thoughts here on, we've seen a lot of these in the media, and it's an incredible opportunity that I think the government side has right now to be able to bring this forward and discuss it here at committee. It's we're seeing minister after minister go through these fundraisers, these pay for access schemes, and it's they have a chance here to bring and talk about.
On a point of order, we have 45 minutes left. We've got the information commissioner here, and we've passed the letter of motion, which means we should move on at this point. So
you are correct, Mr. Lightbound. Madam Legault, we have to move on with the discussion that we have here today. We have 45 minutes left. We appreciate you being here today to discuss the supplementary estimates B. And we welcome your opening remarks on that. I'm not going to get into the details of it because we have a short amount of time. So, Madam Legault, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My remarks are very brief. In fact, my colleague is handing out a deck that I'll be referring to as my opening remarks. Bon après-midi à tous. Thank you.
I'd like to all wish you a good afternoon.
Lila Michaud, my Acting Assistant Commissioner and Chief Financial Officer. Mr. Chair, I'm here today to ask you to approve our request for additional funding, which was included in Supplementary Estimates B, tabled on November 3rd. Afin d'aider le comité à prendre...
In order to assist the committee in making a decision this afternoon, I prepared a few slides explaining our strategy to reduce inventory at the Office of the Commissioner. It explains the purpose of the strategy, the reason for the request for additional financing, the way that this strategy will be implemented, and the projected results.
Really, the first slide in the short deck that I've provided to you, essentially the request for additional funding was made to the Treasury Board, and the purpose is strictly to reduce the inventory of complaints at the OIC. The Treasury Board supported the request for additional funds for 1 year. The funding that is being requested is for fiscal year 2016-2017, and it is really a fit-gap measure that was put in place pending the possible introduction and passage of amendments to the Access to Information Act. The funding that's been awarded or that is subject to approval today is strictly to be allocated to investigations. The objective is very, very specific. We actually have been required to complete 2,361 complaints. And this is a very precise number, and the number is really based on our historical performance in terms of how many complaints per individual, per investigator, and so on. So that's why the number is very specific. We started the inventory with 3,000 complaints, slightly over that. We are expecting to receive close to 2,000 complaints, new complaints this year, based on our current projections, and we are 3/4 of the year done. with the augmented investigative capacity, with the additional funding, we will close over 2,000 files, and that would leave a remaining of about 2,600. So essentially a reduction of about 500 complaints. If the funding is not approved, then the inventory will increase to over 3,600 complaints. What we have done so far, Mr. Chair, is we have cash managed essentially pending the decision of this committee, and we have hired a mix of full-time employees and consultants, and we have provided comprehensive training to these FTEs. We have managed to secure some additional space for these additional people with the goodwill of Elections Canada, who is housed in the same office as we are. So that's also a temporary measure, but we're not paying for this office space at this time, thanks to Elections Canada. Part of the funding was to upgrade the IT network to service the additional people. What we are doing in terms of monitoring the results is we have very fixed closure targets every month, which we follow. I basically meet with my senior team every week. We also review the results on a monthly basis at the Executive Committee, which is composed mostly of our directors of investigations. And we also submit the results of our progress to our Audit and Evaluation Committee. And by the way, the representative of the Auditor General is also sits on our Audit Committee on a regular basis, so they're also appraised of that. And that's relevant because should the funding be approved, the Auditor General will also review how the money has been spent and allocated. And if you look to the last page, I included the graph because if you see in red, that's basically the performance that we've managed to achieve so far in anticipation of this funding being rolled out for the entire fiscal year. And you can see the difference that a few additional people have made in terms of our closure rate. So the next steps really are the approval by this committee of the sub-B or not, and really we will be reporting on the results of this initiative to this committee and to Parliament via our annual report, or obviously at any such time that this committee would like us to report. Alors, encore une fois, Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de m'avoir...
So once again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your invitation to discuss a request for additional funding, which will be voted on for sub-B, and we're prepared to answer any questions you may have.
7 minutes.
Merci.
7 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Commissioner for participating in our committee work. It's very appreciated. I may have some general questions at the outset. This is the first opportunity I've had to look at these figures. So what I understand is that you wish to have an adjustment for additional money under sub-B, $3 million, which represents an increase of about 30% of your budget. Could you explain in terms of staff? Could you provide me with a breakdown of this additional personnel that you have hired or are about to hire? Are these employees that are term employees, casuals, consultants? Could you provide me with a breakdown? Yes, of course. It's a bit of a complicated issue because the budget has not yet been voted on, and we're now in December. That adds to the complexity. When we assess the amount that we could absorb during the year, we realized that there were 20 investigators. These were permanent staff, term employees, or temporary employees. And with this, there were 8 consultants, and we had allocated money for legal assistant for the investigators. We also have an amount for the IT network. We had to increase our capacity with this additional staff. And the 200,000, this is not really money that comes to us, but now, to date, is we have I think we've hired 16 additional people. These are permanent, temporary employees. And as for the rest, I think we have 17 consultants who have been now integrated into the office. So we remained within our budget, but because we can't hire people on a permanent basis, this is funding for 1 year. And this is how we've managed the situation. The people didn't all come in at the same time. We have to train them, you understand. We have to train them so that they can do investigations. We have an IT system that allows us to do case management, so we have to train people. So we phased in the arrival of these staff members, and we just welcomed the last group last week. Now we're stable, and if you don't approve the vote today, we'll have to reduce our staff. So if I understand correctly, you've already begun to develop your capacity to meet the objectives that you have set, and if I look at this, there's $1.8 million for professional staff. That includes consultants, investigators. I would assume these are investigators that are being hired. They have a contract, and you've hired 17. Yes, that's correct. Since this is a temporary measure, we couldn't hire permanent staff. That's how we've developed the submission to Treasury Board. This would enable us to absorb, if you like, an increase in staff quickly without any long-term impacts. And this increase, will it become permanent once you've had it approved, or is it just for a fixed time period? The funding is just for this year. And the problem is that the government announced that it would be amending the Access to Information Act, and we haven't seen the content of these changes, so we can't determine what the impact that it'll have on our budget. But in the meantime, we thought it would be logical to reduce our complaint inventory, particularly since there may be changes to the way we operate. So we wanted to get rid of this inventory as much as possible. And if I read very quickly, as far as your inventory objectives, please clarify. So once you get these resources for consultants and with the additional funding, what do you see the situation being at the end of the fiscal year? How many complaints will you have settled if you have all these consultants? We started off with over 3,000 complaints in our inventory. Now they're about 2,800, meaning that we absorbed all the people who came in, and we've reduced the inventory by just over 200 files. By year end, we'll have about 400 other files that will have been dealt with over and above what comes in. And we will have 4,900 complaints but at the end of the year, but we'll wind up with about 2,800. That's what we're striving to attain. And in English we say we'll be on target. We have made a lot of progress with these files. We're delighted by that. And finally, we're starting to reduce our inventory. And that's the first time this has happened in 4 years. That's it. No, that's fine.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for coming back, both of you. So walk me through just so I understand, there's right now a file room essentially filled with files that are inventoried, that are just, how long have they been there? What's the, I guess, why?
Why are they there is because we have not been able to deal with the incoming complaints over the years. When I started at the OIC in 2009, we had 2,500 files in inventory. And then we were able to reduce the inventory until about 2011, and we were down to 1,700. And after that, we had a combination of budget cuts and reduction overall. And so we had a reduction in staff, and we had an increase in the number of complaints. So compounded, we ended up at 3,000.
Great. Okay. But now what you're asking for is changes to an IT network that would help handle the traffic, from what I understand. So I guess, hiring the consultants, I would have thought, and I apologize for the tough questions. I think it's important though. I would have thought I would have personally waited to see if I got the money before I went and hired these people. Now you say it's incumbent upon the committee to keep these people around, or else you're going to have to let them go. So it seems a bit of a backwards logic in some of this. I'm still a little confused, so we can clarify some of that, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm. No, I really appreciate your question. It's a very fair question. And what we have done is we really have cash managed. We do have a base budget. So that's what we've done. We've been actually extremely careful in the way that we have hired people so that we know that we are depending on the vote of the committee. And when you hire consultants, they are not permanent employees, so we have the flexibility. And that's why we have a higher component of consultants that we had originally planned for, because we didn't know, and we will not know until today, what the result of the vote is going to be. But we have essentially cash managed that money. And so if the committee would decide not to vote in favor of supplementary estimates B, we would be able to continue our basic operation as usual. We would simply close less files. But we would not have a difficulty in managing the decision in terms of people, if that's your question. So, but I appreciate your question. We had no choice because the funding is approved for one fiscal year. So, and I understand that other committees are reviewing the estimates process and so on. Yeah. That's a good example of why it's probably a good idea to do that.
Okay, I guess still trying to draw the linkage between the IT network and how that plays. You've painted the consultants' vision very, very clearly and vividly in my mind. I'm anticipating there's a plethora of consultants sitting around a TV wondering if this is going to be approved or not, so they know if they will have jobs or not. However, if you can tie that back to linkages between the IT network and help me here to...
The IT component is very simple. It's really more computers for the people who are working, and to make sure that we could run the cable to a different floor, and that we could have the proper IT security around that. It's a very basic IT request. Is simply to accommodate additional people on a different floor and linking them to our system. And Lila, I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So in the breakdown that you provided, then of the 3 million, there's 1 million for personnel, 1.8 for professional and special services. I'm assuming that's also consultants, 97 for rentals, and 121 for acquisition of machinery and equipment. So I would, if I'm looking at this without your explanation, I would assume the 121 would be for the computers. Yes. Yes. However, that's correct. You're saying that it's that the majority of this ask is professional and special services. So the large part of it is the consultants. So, okay. What's the rentals component of it?
The rentals component was a portion of money in order to rent additional space. Okay. That's what it was, because the OIC is at full capacity. So we don't have extra space. We have basically filled up every space available in our
But I
office.
thought, sorry to interrupt, I thought Elections Canada was providing space. There's
Elections Canada is providing us for this space at this moment. So we will see how the 97,000 gets allocated in the end. What do you want to answer that?
Yes, Election Canada are providing us space, so we probably won't have to pay for the space that they're providing us, but because it was a vacant floor, there was some work to do, like in regards to the cubicles. There was some we had to buy some déclasseurs. We had to buy a few things like for consultant to be able to work there. So we're using part of this $97,000 to be able to
for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that seems odd that it would go into rentals and if it's actually for cubicle space. But if I could just wrap up here, I guess. I anticipate you're probably, well, I don't think we're anticipating an election anytime soon. So I'd imagine the Election Canada space is probably going to be available for at least the near future. Do you have a commitment from Elections Canada that space is going to be yours until a certain time period?
No, they've actually told us that it was until the end of this fiscal year. They also don't know what's going to happen in terms of electoral reforms, so they don't know whether they're going to need to ramp up, whether they're going to need to use the space for training. So they've provided us with the space until the end of the fiscal year, but we don't know after that.
If you can get out of them what they expect in electoral reform, would be great for us. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't think that's your responsibility, Madam Commissioner.
No.
Mr. Blakey, for up to 7 minutes, please.
True, Mr. Chair. Je voulais juste demander les à peu près 3 millions de...
$3 million for staff, additional staff. They've already been hired. But is this $3 million over 12 months, 10 months, 6 months? What? It's only for fiscal year 2016-2017, so starting April 1st, 2016 to March 31st, 2017. And when we made our projections, there were people who were supposed to start working in May. But I must say that the reason why we were able to start in May is because we did an anticipatory hiring measure. So we were able to hire these people quite quickly. I've been in the public service for a long time, and I always work on a what-if case. What if I try to make sure that everything's ready, and that to make sure that I was going to be ready if we were to be given additional funding. Is it realistic to think that if we keep this staffing level at this rate that we would be able to eliminate the inventory of complaints? Clearly, additional staff, that works. You can see that from the results that I shared with the committee, and that's what we've always said. You need a certain number of staff members to process the files, and as I said earlier, when I began at the start, we were working on reducing the inventory, and we see this year we're starting to be able to chip away at it, but in theory, well, yes, you could ask yourself whether we'll be able to, if we hire 100 additional staff, are we going to be able to clear all the inventories? But that's not realistic, because all of the departments are going to have to respond to our investigations. So if you look at where we are right now, we can see that there's been a reduction in the number of files, and we're still waiting for responses from departments. So we've struck a good balance. We have struck a good balance between department responses and our ability to investigate. Do you intend to submit another request? Do you intend to ask for the same staff levels next week until everything's been eliminated? Yes, we will be submitting another ask next year so that we can ensure that this inventory is going down. But what is especially as important for staff continuity is the fact that we spend a lot of time training people, so we can make sure that people are efficient, effective, and it would be good if we could keep these people for the following year as well, because we'll have made gains in efficiencies. The people will already be trained. They'll be aware of our IT system, of our policies. So yes, we will be able to achieve exponential gains because we won't spend so much time having to hire and train people. In your opinion, is there any urgency in eliminating the inventory before the government amends the Access to Information Act? I think that would be ideal. If we could reduce the inventory before we change systems, particularly the older files. But despite everything that we've put in place for this year, I must say that the procedures are going to have to be continued if there's a change. We have really achieved results in our efforts to communicate to the media what we're doing. And this model that we've developed is based on the Ontario Commissioner's Office. This is the way their office works. And in this way, we'll be prepared to make a transition if there's a change. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your patience earlier when we were discussing other committee business. So thank you for your patience.
Mr. Blakey, we now move to Mr. Long, please.
Thank you, Chair, and it's great to see you again, Commissioner. And in my previous life, when I was with the St. John Sea Dogs, a hockey team, and before that in different businesses, we had a budget process, and quite an extensive budget process. And for me, if somebody came to me and said, look, I need an amendment or supplemental budget money to the tune of 30%, I mean, obviously I'd be very concerned, and we would look at that. That being said, I think from a business perspective, the first thing I would ask is, have you internally now looked at the process? Like, did you do everything you possibly could internally to alleviate this problem? And could you just share with us some of the initiatives maybe you took before you came here to drive down that number of complaints?
Well, I am in the last year of my mandate, so I have been doing this work for a very long time now. And as I said, when I first started, we started doing a lot of changes in order to become more efficient. And that really bore fruit for the first several years until our actual complement was cut significantly over the following years. But this year in particular, we have done two main initiatives which are really bearing fruit in terms of efficiencies. And the first one is we implemented the Federal Court of Appeal decision of last year, which was a seminal decision in terms of administrative files. So what the Federal Court of Appeal decided was that there had to be much more rigor in terms of institutions asking for long extensions. And we developed a simplified process. We have developed some forms. That's been extremely efficient in terms of changes for our results, and I actually have these results with me here, so I can share that with you. But in terms of where we were at last year and this year for these administrative files, last year at this time we had closed 293 files, and this year we closed 461 files. So that's in part as a result of extra people, but it's also as a result of what we've implemented with the federal government institutions. And we have been using interest-based mediation very, very significantly this year. And again, last year at this time we had closed 328 files, and this year we closed 708 files using this process. So we are actually making a significant difference both on processes coupled with the additional people. So those are what we're doing. We have gone through, I've personally gone through all of the old inventories in terms of our national security files, special delegation files. That's over 400 files. We did that over the summer to really go through all these files, identify portfolio approaches, identify clusters of issues, clusters of complainants, and so we're working on that now. Two of my directors actually went through the rest of the inventory, and we did the same, looked at all of the files that could be closed quickly. We are also reviewing all the files when they come in terms of identifying the ones that we can quickly resolve because the issue is more simple. So we go through all of those as well. So at this time, frankly, we monitor all the files, we monitor what's doing. I think we've done everything that we could in terms of trying to sort these files as quickly as we can. Some files do take very long, and there's no question about that. Some files are 100,000 pages thick, and then there is, in some instances, no way to reduce them. And so those take a very long time.
Your complaint inventory, it goes back to what year? I know here you have 2011-12, but do you have complaints back?
I have 2 complaints from 2007-2008. Those complaints are the same. They're related. They've been investigated. Hopefully they will close soon. In terms of the entire inventory, I could tell you exactly. I think I have a graph here with that information. Do you have it? So
how many, you said you had 2 from 2007?
I have 2 from 2007-2008. Those are special delegation files. They have a national security issue. We were waiting for a Federal Court of Appeal decision on the interpretation of a specific section of the CSIS Act. That just came down a few weeks ago. So those 2 files will be completed. 2008-2009, I have 22. I have 13 with the CBC. Those are legacy files. I have 2009, 2010, 27. Anyway, so it goes on, but the bulk is really 15, 16, I have 1,000, and 16, 17, I have 737. I can provide this to the committee if you wish. We have it all in terms of what's there. I know what these files are. I know where they're at in terms of their resolution.
So just in days or months, I guess, how long, what's the average length to process a complaint?
Well, we always report on that in our annual report, and what we do usually is based on 2 indicators. We look at them from the time that we get them, because we have a lot of old files, and we look at them from the time that we can assign them to someone. So my median turnaround time from the date of assignment to the time of a finding, I just want to make sure I have the right one, is for administrative files, it's 38 days. That's from the time that I assign it to an investigator. So the median turnaround time for those files is 38 days. And for the exemption files, it's 56 days.
How does
That's
that
from the
compare?
time of assignment.
How does that compare to provinces? Do you at times look at that average rate compared to the other provinces to see if you're above it or below it, or?
We don't look at that, mainly because we don't really have the same types of files, by and large. At the provincial level, they have, they deal with hospitals, municipalities, school boards. At the federal level, we deal with the Canada Revenue Agency, very complex audit files, national security files with CSIS, CSEC, RCMP. We really don't have the same types of files, actually. And all of the legislations are different, and the jurisdictions where they have order-making power, usually their timelines are better than us. That's for sure.
Okay, we've gone past the time, so that finishes the 7-minute round. Colleagues, we got about 15 minutes left in the meeting. And we need to actually go through the votes at the end. Now, I don't anticipate that there's going to be any reductions in the budget because we don't want the Information Commissioner to be borrowing more space from other agencies. So unless somebody signals otherwise, we'll take it right to the Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Yeah, I was just trying to sort out, so you're asking for $3.3 million roughly, and if I am working this out correctly, you're suggesting that you'll close an additional 1,061 files with that money. And so roughly we're looking at $3,160 per complaint. I don't know if you break it down into the...
How I was going to proceed
No,
with the
no.
meeting. You'll get an opportunity
Oh, I see.
to
Okay,
ask
I
this
thought you were
question.
closing down.
All right,
Okay, fair
Mr.
enough.
Kelly. 5 minutes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, given that I share my colleague, Mr. Long's just general reaction to such a substantial increase that we're looking at in this supplemental estimate, but I understand that there has been an ongoing issue with backlog of complaints, and to maybe just ask you, rather than look at the bigger picture here and see what assurance you can give our committee that in the event that I mean, this committee adopted most of the recommendations that you brought to us in our study. We've recommended the order-making power in our committee's recommendation. We sought in our study to try to address what had been described as systemic cultural failings within various departments and institutions of government around access. The very act of a complaint coming to your office suggests that there's at least someone out there who is unhappy with a response to from another institution of government. Our goal here is really ultimately to shrink your department and shrink your office, to not have complaints and to not have the necessity of investigation of complaints. If this committee approves the additional money that you are looking for, and you are able to hire additional personnel or keep additional personnel as described, and to deal with and address the backlog, over time, do you see us getting to the final goal, which is perhaps a smaller office with fewer staff and fewer necessity of the work that your agency does?
I certainly hope so. I do think that there is a necessity for oversight, independent and objective oversight of government's decisions on disclosure. I've always said that the main inefficiency in the system is that my office historically, and this dates back to 1983, has spent an inordinate amount of time on dealing with delay complaints. These are just about institutions not responding on time. And a lot of the recommendation, I mean, that's over 35%.
And then they go on to be unhappy about the length of time that their complaint takes to be dealt with.
Well, those complaints we actually deal with fairly quickly. Okay. I mean, we don't have a lot of those in inventory. It's very, very minimal. But it really does take a lot of resources in the office. When people argue about what should be disclosed under an exemption of national security, then I've always thought, you know, it's a fair issue in the sense that a lot of these files are complex. And, you know, to me, that's where the bulk of the office's work should always be. To have always 35 or so % of our investigators dedicated to these delay files is a real waste. And it's a waste in institutions as well, because their office also have to deal with those once there is a complaint. So that would be the main gain if we had amendments dealing with timeliness, for instance. If we have order-making power, I don't anticipate that the delay complaints will be an issue at all. We'll just be, you know, obviously, we will be able to resolve these files very quickly. So to me, that's the main issue. In terms of the refusal files and the exemption files, if we reduce it to just that in terms of what's coming in, that would probably be a lot smaller.
Okay. I hope that we don't, by approving and creating or adding permanence to additional staff positions, that we don't end up ultimately with a bigger office than we might need. But I see the necessity of at least getting to that point where we might have that as an issue. So I'll, in the interest of time, I'll give back my extra 22 seconds.
Thank you. Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Very much. So I'll get to the back of the napkin math. So as I understand it, there's roughly $3.3 million that you are requesting. You're suggesting that with that you will be able to close an additional 1,061 files, which by my calculation works out to, on average, $3,160 per file. And then when I look at, you say you are able to close 1,300 files a year, and if we use that same math of $3,160 per complaint, that works out to $4.1 million or so on dealing with complaints. But your total budget is $11.8 roughly million. And so I wonder, have you looked at, so $4.1 million to resolve complaints, what's the additional monies being used for, and is there any sense of reallocating them just to clear up the backlog?
Every reallocation that was possible in that office, believe me, has been made. I have said this before when we looked at budget. I cannot reduce the finance department. I cannot reduce the IT folks. We are running on a shoestring in these areas. The balance between investigative work, mandate work, and internal services is about 78-22 in terms of percentage. And that's basically where we are. I've basically cut where I could. The amount of money in the new money, consultants cost a lot more than permanent employees. And that was a constraint that was imposed on us because this is temporary funding. If it were permanent funding, then we would have permanent employees, which would not actually cost the same amount of money than a consultant does in this market in terms of access to information. So the cost of the supplementary B funding is a lot higher in terms of how many people you can get for that money.
Just one follow-up question, and then I'm going to give my time over to Mr. Saini. $3,160 per complaint seems quite high to me. With my experience previously as a commercial litigation lawyer, these are paralegal files at the end of the day, these privacy complaints. I find it odd that it would be so high. Is that consistent with the amounts we'd be looking at on a per file basis at the provincial level? Are you aware of that?
I don't know, and I think we have to understand in terms of the additional money, there's money for rental, there's money for IT, and there's money for employee benefits, so that comes off. But it's still very high. I agree with you. It's very high, and it would be less high if it were on a permanent basis than a temporary basis. How that compares in terms of files, I really don't know.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay. Mr. Massey, do you have some questions? Or Mr. Saini, I'm sorry, Mr. Saini.
It's okay. Quick question. Nice to see you again. I just want to get maybe a broader understanding. Obviously, the cases have been built over time, so there is a bit of a creep where each year cases are a little bit further behind. So it seems to me that you're asking for this money for a one-time one-time funding request so that these cases can be cleared. But your successor may face the same situation in a few years. So to me, it seems like there's a bit of a structural issue where you may not have enough employees or you may not have enough resources ongoing, as opposed to coming back every 3-4 years and saying, look, I have this backlog. Is that something that you want to highlight or something you want to suggest in a way?
Well, I've been saying this for years. I mean, the Privacy Commissioner's Office has twice as much of a budget that my office does. It's been an ongoing issue with the Office of the Information Commissioner of Canada. If you read the first annual report of the first Information Commissioner, she basically deals with some files and she starts accumulating backlog of files, and that was the first year, and it's been like this every single year since the office was started over 30 years ago. What did happen, though, is we were making indents, as I said before, and then there was a combination of an increase in complaints and reduction in budget, and that's really compounded the problem, and that's quite unfortunate. But now these files are there, and they have to be dealt with.
This is just going to be a stopgap temporarily. It's not a.
It is a stopgap measure, and it's and I think there is a certain logic to it if there are going to be amendments to the legislation, to actually go through a regular process with a new legislation to see what would be the appropriate funding depending on what's in the legislation, and I don't know what that is. The stopgap measure may need to be extended for another year if the legislation doesn't come through or is not coming into effect in the next fiscal year. That is certainly what we would be seeking at that time. At the end of the day, what we do know is that this is actually working. We are actually making a difference. It actually is reducing the inventory. I'm quite enthusiastic about the fact that it is making a dent for the first time in a long time.
My concern is not that you're not going to be effective with the money here, because I think you've shown that, and I think anytime you have a bump in resources, obviously you're going to be more effective. My concern is going forward. Your successor may have the same difficulty going down 2, 3, 4 years where there's a creep of cases that have not been resolved because of lack of a budget or lack of resources. So that's why I wanted to ask you that, but that's the only question I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Saini. I have nobody else on the list, and we do have to actually adjudicate this. Commissioner, we thank you very much for coming. I think the committee has taken it under advisement that should a legislative change happen that would significantly change the expectations of your department, that an accompanying study of what the budget should be in appropriate to that legislative change, and it's taken under advisement, and I think we'll have that discussion should the situation arise. So we thank you very much for your time, appreciate your patience.
Thank you.
And colleagues, I need a volunteer. Who's going to be here tomorrow after question period? Wow. Somebody needs to table the report that we're about to adopt in order to make it on time.
Immediately following question period?
Immediately following question period.
I will be in question period tomorrow.
So is the committee okay with Mr. Kelly tabling the report on my behalf tomorrow? I don't think he can. I don't think he can. So, colleagues, according to what we need to do here to appropriate these funds for the Office of the Information Commissioner, shall vote 1 carry. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none. Shall I report the votes on the supplementary estimates to the House? All in favor? All opposed? Seeing none. It is carried. Thank you very much, colleagues. I will see you again next week. Keep in mind we're going to be reviewing the report as I mentioned earlier. So thank you very much.